Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you
Hello and welcome to Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast, every GBV LP, every 2 weeks. My name is Jeff Gomez, and today we're looking at the first of two records to come out in 2014, Motivational Jumpsuit. But first, as usual, all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators. And of course, many thanks goes out to Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database, which you really should visit at gbvdb.com. Go to my site, everygbvlp.com, to subscribe to future episodes or to listen to past episodes of this podcast, and drop me a line with corrections, suggestions, or thoughts at jeff@everygbvlp.com. I also want to mention that next week I'll be uploading another bonus episode. This time I'm talking with Mike Postalakis, the filmmaker who directed 3 Guided by Voices videos, as well as a clip for Rickard Wiki. It was a super entertaining conversation and my longest episode yet, clocking in at an hour and a half, so you'll really want to give it a listen. Cancel plans if you have to. Now let's get to the show. Okay, in this episode, we're going to be talking about Motivational Jumpsuits. Now, around the time of this record came out, everything seemed to be great with the band, and it was an amazing time to be a fan. The old lineup was back together again, they were playing great shows, and they were releasing records that were just as good as the classic LPs from their heyday, and they were doing so at a rate of 2 to 3 a year. It was like your divorced parents got back together, and you didn't have to have 2 Christmases anymore. It was as if that old friend of yours who had moved away and went to a new school and you never saw them, moved back and you got to be best friends again. It was also too good to be true. You just knew something bad was bound to happen, and, of course, it did. In October of 2013, drummer Kevin Flannel put a set of drums that he'd used on a number of GBV records for sale on eBay. It was the kit he'd played on numerous tours and at least one TV appearance. Not to mention they were part of the sessions for the classic LPs, B1000 and Alien Lanes, in addition to the more recent reunion records like the one we're discussing now. So far, that doesn't strike me as terribly controversial. I've seen it done plenty of times before. In an era of Kickstarter or with websites like Reverb, bands and musicians often sell memorabilia, including their own gear, directly to fans. However, what seemed to set people off about what Flannel did was that his opening bid was set at $55,000. That struck many people as being pretty damned expensive, bordering on outrageous. But is it? An original propeller will sell for almost 5 figures, and Bob and Toby each command thousands of dollars for their artwork, and those exist in only 2 dimensions. They just sit there. This was a drum set. You could play it. It was useful. Plus, Pollard's put out hundreds of LPs and singles, and none of them were free. So why is $55,000 so controversial? Either someone pays it or they don't. What's the big deal? Well, Pollard seemed to think it was a big deal. He called Kevin to complain, at which point Flannel responded via an email wherein he laid out his various points and reasons for why he was doing what he was doing. Pollard then responded to this with a very nasty reply that left no doubt as to his current or future relationship with Flannel, Bob ending the email with, "Don't ever fucking bother me again." The reason we know any of this is because Flannel posted the emails on Facebook. And while that is undoubtedly not a cool move, Bob intended, I'm sure, for that exchange to be private. Given that everything that was being said in the press and probably around town, I'd guess that Flannel felt he had to make the correspondence public just to get his side of the story out there. And even though Bob seemed to think Kevin was making some sort of dick move, trying to rip off fans for cash, that's not the way it seems to me. Here's what Flannel wrote on a website he'd set up in order to sell the drums. So you might ask, why sell them if they are so great? Well, you need to understand that I do so with great reservation, as I have sentimental feelings attached to them. Great memories of lugging them in and out of studios, bars, clubs, halls, and stadiums, and always feeling secure that they could take a beating and sound great while doing so. I guess I believe that there is someone out there who will appreciate them as much as, if not more than, I do. All I can say is that I take that at face value. He's a married guy with 2 young kids. With just 1 young kid, I worry about my financial future, like there's college, clothes, a mortgage, what if they get sick? So I can only imagine what it's like to have 2. And remember that Kevin was the drummer. Drummers don't get the big advances or a share of the publishing. He wasn't the main songwriter. Kevin didn't have royalty checks coming in from a dozen different solo or side projects the way Bob did. And while Pollard's earned every cent of what he's received, I'd find it hard to believe he wouldn't cut Kevin some slack. Yes, Bob owns the name Guided by Voices, but he can't claim to own or be in control of every aspect of its history. And I get that this is the guy who wrote Leave My Fucking Life Alone, but doesn't that extend to others? Why not leave Kevin's life alone? But Bob didn't, and instead he sent Kevin an email in which he fired Flannel, in addition to berating him on a number of levels. I won't quote from it much, because it's just too depressing to do so, but one thing that stuck out to me the most is that Pollard criticized Flannel for being an amateur. This I almost can't believe. So that's what Guided by Voices is all about? Being professional? Really? I won't go into the dozens of examples where Bob's conducted himself, both live and on record, as, shall we say, less than professional. Suffice it to say that Pollard's on thin ice when he proclaims to be a standard bearer for musical professionalism. If this was Rush we were talking about, maybe, but GBV, and yes, I get that Bob's the boss and he gets to call the shots, but this just smacks to me as a double standard. Pollard's other main point is that no one cares who's drumming for the band, writing that, "Do not delude yourself, Kevin, that people gave a shit who is behind that drum kit." I can only speak for myself and say, I care. And Bob cares too, because is he really going to say he liked The Who, or got as excited by their records or seeing them live, when anyone but Keith Moon was drumming for them? And if Pollard extends that thinking to guys like Mitch Mitchell or Tobin Sprout, then he's the one who's deluded, since the overall charm, not to mention the musical output of that early lineup, is a huge part of why those records were so successful. Bob even referenced this when the guys got back together in 2010, saying, "I've been convinced that there definitely seems to be a unique chemistry characterized by everyone's individual approach and style. It sort of comes through when you hear it, and one can identify it, for the most part, with this particular lineup." That's not to take anything away from other incarnations of the band, which I and many other fans love. In fact, the current lineup, the one who recorded the last bunch of records, is quite possibly the best and most polished that's ever existed. But still, you cannot deny the charm and the history of the original lineup. Without them and what they brought to LPs like B-1000 and Alien Lanes, there is no GBV. But yeah, I get it. Flannel should have ran his plans by Pollard first, and yeah, 55 grand is a bit high. But Bob's reaction seems totally overblown, not to mention needlessly cruel. I also find it to be totally at odds with his jovial Uncle Bob persona. Anyway, Flannel was out, and previous drummer Kevin March, who'd played on the last 2 LPs for Matador, was asked back. He would go on to tour with the band and stayed on the next and last LP before Bob killed the band yet again while on the Cool Planet tour. Getting back to Motivational Jumpsuit, the LP followed the usual template of the recent run of records. It consists of 20 songs in under 40 minutes, with some pretty polished tracks sitting next to Bob's usual lo-fi snippets, as well as Tobin's mini masterpieces. 5 singles were released from the record: Alex and the Omegas, Planet Score, Save the Company, The Littlest League Possible, and Vote for Me, Dummy. A very funny basketball-themed video was made for Planet Score. It was directed by Mike Postolakis, an Ohio native who now lives in Los Angeles. He's a writer, performer, and filmmaker. He's also a very funny and interesting guy, not to mention he's a huge GBV fan. It would be the first of 4 star-studded videos Postolakis would make for Pollard, each one featuring actors who had been in some pretty big movies or TV shows. Maybe the most well-known being Matt Jones, who played Badger on Breaking Bad. Jones is also a big GBV fan. In my bonus episode with Postolakis, which will go live next week, he offers all kinds of inside information about the shoot for the Planet Score video, plus the 3 others he did for Pollard. He also talks about the video that almost got made for a track off of Please Be Honest. In terms of Motivational Jumpsuit, Bob was open to any of the singles being chosen. The reason that it was Planet Score was because it seemed to Postolakis to work best as a kind of mini-movie. The result is a lot of fun to watch, and because it was produced by website Funny or Die, the video got some nice exposure and was seen by tens of thousands of people. Another cool thing about the song is that the line about Planet Score being a record store came true in 2015 when friends Joe Stolz and Tim Lohman opened Planet Score Records in Maplewood, Missouri. They'd been in a band a decade prior, and Lohman had worked for years at Record Reunion, which, to suit changing tastes, later changed its name to CD Reunion. When Record Reunion founder Dan Kaiser retired, Stoltz and Lohman bought the store and moved it out of a desolate strip mall into a location that used to be a reupholstery shop about 20 minutes south, because, as Lohman says, we figured the neighborhood could use a record store. The guys have impeccable taste, listing as their main passions garage rock, punk, psychedelic, rock, and prog. Stoltz is also a big GBV fan, so when it came time to name their new store, he didn't have to look far since Motivational Jumpsuit had just come out. After posting his idea online months before the store actually opened, the news made its way to Pollard, who immediately gave his okay. And then, less than a week after the store was open, Bob paid Planet Score a visit. He shopped, hung out, posed for photos, and signed all of Stoltz's GBV vinyl. I reached out to the store with a few questions, and I'll post that full exchange to the Facebook page. The cover of Motivational Jumpsuit is curious in that it's barely a collage. It features a photo, presumably of Rockathon headquarters, or maybe it's just Bob's basement. We see a stack of half-open boxes and a poster for the Tiger Bomb EP on the wall. In the middle of the photo is a vintage 70s-looking person we can only see from behind. Placing them in that contemporary photo is a nice touch. It's as if they're in the room staring at the boxes and we're behind them, staring at them, staring. Plus, the self-referential nature of the cover reinforces the idea that all of Pollard's work takes place in a self-contained universe. It's Bob's world, we just live in it. Motivational Jumpsuit received the usual mix of reviews. The AV Club gave the record a C+, calling the LP a ramshackle collection of 20 1 to 3 minute songs, ranging with crunchy power chords, fragmented power pop melodies, and impressionistic lyricism from the group's ageless anchor, lead singer-songwriter Robert Pollard. Summing up the record, the review declared that it's difficult to find any song on Motivational Jumpsuit that GBB lifers can place among the group's most accomplished work. More charitably, website Louder Than War scored the LP 8 out of 10, calling the album another vital record in GBV's distinguished canon. Website Exclaim also loved the record, giving it a 9 out of 10 and writing that the only fear with Motivational Jumpsuit is that 21 albums and countless members into GBV's career, it will get lost in the shuffle. Consequence of Sound, giving the album a B, said that it moves from one jam to the next, while also stating that the LP is an accessible entry point into the world of Guided by Voices, comparable to Propeller and Alien Lanes, as it reaches for the big rock tropes in a lo-fi context. Now let's look at the LP track by track. The record kicks off with The Littlest League Possible.
Gonna have a lot of fun. Gonna hit a hum ride. In the littlest league possible.
This is a super fun song that shows Pollard at his most meta, commenting not only on his jock past, but also the place in rock history which GBV, after nearly 30 years of existence, currently found itself. The song starts off as an ode to baseball, the sport which Pollard, even though he also played football and basketball, excelled at, Bob writing, "Gonna have a lot of fun, gonna hit a home run." But he then provides the context where all this fun is happening, and it's not at the major league level. A somewhat wistful admission, since Pollard was a gifted enough athlete that he could have gone pro. Instead, this is all taking place in the littlest league possible, a place which Bob defines as the most rudimentary division of competition. Pollard then weighs the pros and cons of playing in such a little league, asking rhetorically whether it's better to be the biggest fish in the smallest pond, or else to keep banging it out in the Texas League. This is a super interesting discussion coming from Bob, since he'd once in fact tried for a bigger audience with both GBV and as an athlete. As a kid, he was being groomed to be a professional athlete, and then, years later, he tried to achieve mainstream success with Guided by Voices. And while he was never officially on a major label or in the major leagues, he came close enough to both to realize what it would take to make it in those worlds, and he didn't want to do it.
For his entire career, whether it was sports or rock and roll, he wanted to make his own decisions and do things his way. If that meant playing in the littlest league possible, then that was a sacrifice he was willing to make.
Thank you, Coakley. That's my wife with a guest paragraph. And by this point especially, Pollard seemed perfectly comfortable with that decision. This song is celebratory. He's not stewing or brooding, channeling the lament of Brando's has-been prizefighter who bitterly declared, "I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender." Instead, Bob's saying that he's happy where he is. He doesn't care about which league he's in. He just likes to play the game. By the way, most historians trace the first ever organized game of baseball to Hoboken, New Jersey. It took place in June of 1846 at Elysian Fields. I actually lived pretty much across the street from this location for a few years about a decade ago, in an apartment building called the Elysian. I could see the park where the game took place from my living room. The legendary club Maxwell's is right around the corner from this, which was the site of the GBB concert that ultimately became the For All Good Kids bootleg. And while many kids played baseball in the 19th century, there was no established league for minors until 1939. That's when Carl Stotts founded and named the Little League system, starting it in his hometown of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. In the 80 years since its founding, Little League continues to flourish. According to the website littleleague.org, it's the world's largest organized youth sports program, with millions of players, more than 1 million adult volunteers, and it's played in more than 80 countries. Second song on side 1 is Until Next Time.
I'm off to work again. There goes Mario Andretti. She's a real believer.
This is a short snippet that hints at how the winners and losers of the previous song get chosen. Basically, how do you end up in the major leagues? Is it talent? Is it luck? As Pollard writes, was it not just in your cards? It seems so unfair. For a guy who'd seen his contemporaries, whether it was athletes or musicians, rise higher and go farther than he did, this is an interesting idea. There's basically no rhyme or reason as to who succeeds or who doesn't. The greatness of some bands never gets recognized, and some people never get their due. And in an upside-down world where talent is marginalized and mediocrity is praised, Bob wants to set things straight, writing, "The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first." Third song is Writer's Block, Psycho All the Time.
It's taking me hours, days.
If the opening song on the record was Pollard at his most meta, this song, about writer's block and the torture of creation, is surely Bob at his most ironic. The guy's a songwriting machine, putting out a half a dozen full-length LPs in a year and writing an entire record's worth of songs in a single day. So to hear him here lament that it's taking him hours, days, weeks, months, and years to finish writing something, not to mention that the effort costs him sweat, blood, and his own sanity, is pretty much the complete opposite of how Bob actually functions. And it's not just that the writing of the songs is easy for him, but since he's a guy who's never really slaved after the perfect take or getting the right vocal sound, the line here about "the last recording nearly killed me" is also pretty ridiculous and totally untrue. The song's also really funny, with Pollard twisting Publishers Clearinghouse, that company with the sweepstakes, into Publishers Screaming House. And with its talk of composition and publishers, the track harkens back to the 1966 single by the Beatles, Paperback Writer, which saw a wannabe author who'd worked on his book for years begging an editor to take a look. Another interesting thing is that the title is actually Block with a C. It's a pun on block as it's traditionally used in the sense of writer's block. Block there meaning blockage or physically being blocked from moving forward. But in this song, Pollard's spelling of the word with a C provides a different meaning, defined as a combination of countries, parties, or groups sharing a common purpose. You heard this a lot during the Cold War, countries in Europe being described as an Eastern Bloc. The pun's been used before. The English band Bloc Party has been around since the late 90s. I'm not sure why Pollard's using it here, except that maybe he just likes the look of it. Or maybe he's slamming the inherent clickiness of writers, advising them to spend less time worrying over their work and just get it done. Pop Matters said of this song that it gives us an organizing tension for Motivational Jumpsuit, writing that it's easy, as artists get older, to read some subtext of mortality into their work. Here, Pollard seems not so much concerned with that as with his reputation and his creative drive. If Pollard is not putting out 6 records a year, this song seems to ask, then who is Robert Pollard? If he can't keep up the impossible pace he's built, what happens then? It's an interesting question and could provide a clue into Bob's prolific nature. Next up is Child Activist.
They don't have heads.
Whereas the Bears for Lunch had the hangover child, we're now introduced in this lo-fi song to the child activist. A number of kids have, in fact, been activists who have played a part in bringing about change all around the world. Probably the most famous child activist is Pakistani Malala Yousafzai. After ignoring death threats from the Taliban, who had outlawed education for girls, she was shot in the head in 2012 as she was on her way to school when she was just 15 years old. She survived the assassination attempt, and in 2014, she was the youngest person to ever be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. She has gone on to be a passionate and respected voice around the world for human rights and the education of women. Moving on, we have Planet Score. This song's an absolute blast, and to my ears, it's probably the closest the band's ever come to capturing on tape the way they sound live. The sound's just totally raw and in your face in a way that, for as much as it rocks live, a track like Cutout Witch just can't match. It starts with a wallop of guitar and drums, and it doesn't relent for the duration of the song. It also shows how Pollard wrote to the strengths of the guys he had in the band at the time. Like, I can easily see Mitch Mitchell playing this song in my head. It has the perfect chugging forward momentum that he's great at. Whereas if Doug Gillard were in the band, the track would probably be longer and there'd be a solo. There's also some great bass in the song, and the drums are a lot of fun. It's definitely my favorite song on the record, and to my mind, it's the last best recorded example of this lineup. The next track is Jupiter Spin. Here we have the first Tobin Sprout song on the record. It's a nice track that has the same vibe as The Corners Are Glowing from The Bears for Lunch. It also features some nice wah-wah guitar, along with lots of lyrics about a guy dancing. Seriously, the word dancing is used a dozen times in the track. The title of the song refers to the fact that, of all the planets in our solar system, Jupiter spins the fastest. A day on Jupiter lasts less than 10 hours, and that's saying something considering the fact that Jupiter is so large that 1,300 Earths could fit inside it. Next up is Save the Company.
Hamilton lobby in the subway naked. I know you're lost.
While B-1000 and Alien Lanes were mentioned over and over when this lineup got back together, this is one of the few songs to, in my mind, channel the spirit and sound of those ragged classics. Like, this one has sort of a Queen of Cans and Jars vibe. Plus, the chorus and the way Pollard sings it almost remind me of Tabby and Lucy from the final Boston Spaceships record, the amazing Let It Beard. Everything just fits here. It has a great tune, the lyrics are a lot of fun, and while the sound is pretty lo-fi, you don't care because it's an absolutely gorgeous song. The opening lyrics are also classic surreal Pollard, Bob writing, Hamilton lobby, in the subway naked I know you're lost. Too bad he answered, your ripening diamonds are gone. I don't know what to make of that, except that it sounds great against the chord sequence Bob's singing on top of. Pollard also makes a good joke late in the song, writing that he who controls the past is coming up soon from the rear, playing upon the notion of time being a physical thing with the future ahead and the past behind us. The track hews to a classic format, verse, chorus, middle eight break, chorus, showing that Pollard knows all the parts of a song even if he usually chooses not to use them. And even though the sound quality is not great, the choruses have that Phil Spector Be My Baby drum beat, complete with tambourine, and it just sounds awesome. And while I don't glean any great meaning behind the lyrics, the title of this song, as well as West Coast Company Man from the 2017 August by Cake, reflect Pollard's 1950s upbringing. Because while he's not technically a baby boomer, being born in 1957, he was about 2 years too late to be considered one of the so-called greatest generation. He was brought up in the aftershocks of the post-war America mentality when fealty to a corporation was considered to be a good thing. You got a job at IBM or AT&T and you worked there for the rest of your life. This is something that was documented in the classic book, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. Being a company man was considered a good thing, and so, as Pollard sings here, saving the company would be considered an honor, a noble pursuit. And while the countercultural zeitgeist of the 60s put a dent in that kind of thinking, for a while anyway, it returned in the 70s, the me generation turning into workaholics for whom identification with their companies was everything. forget being a man without a country. As Robert Duvall's uber-capitalist laments in Paddy Chayefsky's ultra-prescient satire network, I'm a man without a corporation. Side 1 starts to wind down with Go Without Packing.
Go without packing, not welcome here.
This short track is a return to the bitter songs that made up Side 2 of Propeller. Pollard here telling someone to go without packing, meaning basically, get out of here right now. It's sort of the song version of the note he wrote to Kevin Flannel, who may have actually inspired the song, Bob telling the object of the track that they're not welcome here. Pollard also squashes any hope that the person may have of trying to get back into his good graces, mentioning hopeless language. Basically, don't even try to talk your way out of it. And when Bob ends the song with Go Love Yourself, but then quickly adds, just go, it seems like what he really wants to say is go fuck yourself. The second to last song on Side 1 is Record Level Love. This short Tobin Sprout song, clocking in at just 1 minute and 16 seconds, is absolutely lovely. And while Bob would declare on the next LP that bad love is easy to do, here Toby's singing about the opposite, a record level love that shines on everything and makes you feel the way you want to be. And to show that this isn't just hippie bullshit, Sprouts starts the song by stating that it's not easy. Record level love may exist, but it's also mighty difficult to obtain. Musically, the song's just gorgeous, with jangly guitar and layered vocal harmonies from Tobin. It's another great contribution, showing just how valuable Sprout was to that 6 LP run of reunion records. The next track on Side 1 is I Am Columbus. At nearly 3 minutes, this is the second longest track on the album. Sound-wise, it's a 2 or 3 chord stomper that brings back the tambourine from Save the Company, as well as some organ and electric guitar. Lyrically, Pollard uses 18th century explorer Christopher Columbus as a potent metaphor for someone who not only wants to take your time, but your whole existence, writing, I seek the world. Pitchfork called this song undercooked, describing it as keyboard-jabbed psychedelic sludge. The AV Club didn't like it much either, writing that it was clunky, overwrought, and a wince-worthy miss. Side 2 kicks off with Difficult Outburst and Breakthrough.
Difficult outburst and breakthrough, something bombastic to make you change your point of view before you focus on anything new.
For me, what's interesting here is that Pollard does something on this track that rarely comes up in the thousands of songs he's written and recorded. He sings the first verse twice. This is something that a lot of other singers do, including Morrissey, who I've mentioned a few times in the podcast, but it's rare for Bob, a man who's a mountain of words, to ever repeat himself. The tempo and sound of the song is similar to others on the record, like Planet Score and Vote For Me Dummy. And because of this, even though it's not a bad song, I can't help but feel that it's filler. I mean, it's okay, but it doesn't really grab me, and it shows that, by this point, 5 albums into the reunion, the formula was starting to wear a bit thin. As Pitchfork wrote in the review of Motivational Jumpsuit, GBV's recent albums have by no means tarnished their legacy, but they haven't exactly expanded upon it either. This song is a good example of that. It's okay, but I don't think it exactly earns its place on a 20-song record. Second track on Side 2 is Calling Up Washington. More than half of the 20 songs on Motivational Jumpsuit are under 2 minutes, with 9 of those 11 songs clocking in at less than 90 seconds. This Tobin Sprout track is the album's shortest song at 1 minute and 12 seconds. While I'm normally a big fan of Toby's stuff, Calling Up Washington, while not sounding bad by any stretch, just comes off as a bit half-baked. Especially when you consider that Sprout owns his own recording equipment and the band was on their own label, so it's not like they're being rushed by their A&R guy or that they simply ran out of time in the studio. GBV in this era could have taken as much time as they wanted to get their songs and recordings right, and yet instead they took the opposite approach, releasing records that contained more or less sketches and first takes. The next track is Zero Elasticity.
I got nothing left to go on, that's a fact. Zero elasticity won't bounce back.
This song sort of sounds like a slower, sledgier version of Wire's Three Girl Rumba. It's also another song that, like Planet's score, comes close to capturing the band's live sound. It's a fun track with some background vocals from Pollard and lyrics that mention the album's title, Bob writing that, "I'll go second, you go first," in your motivational jumpsuit. Moving on, we have Bird with No Name.
I'm riding a bird with no name. I'm trying to be more often correct.
The title of this song is a reference to the track Horse with No Name, which was a #1 song in the US and the first single from the band America. The classic folk rock song sounds so much like Neil Young that most people think it's actually Neil Young singing it or that he wrote it, when in fact it's an original composition by America's Dewey Bunnell. That being said, the song replaced Young's Heart of Gold at the top of the American charts. A few years later, America would go on to work with Beatles producer George Martin. They're still together today, having released their 18th record back in 2015. Bird with No Name also, since it's a mostly acoustic track, harkens back to the America track, except that it's ominous and foreboding, whereas the earlier song is cozy and familiar, even if it is about heroin. The lyrics here are mainly impressionistic, Pollard crooning about a forest of bars and photographic cuisine. But the last image, where Bob mentions flying on a bird with no wings, is striking. It's also a nice juxtaposition with the opening line because, while it's fine if you're flying on a bird with no name, if the bird has no wings, there's going to be a problem. The next song is Shine, Tomahawk Breath.
In a place shine all day, falling down for us.
At a few seconds past 3 minutes, this Tobin Sprout track is the record's longest song. Like most of his tracks on the reunion LPs, it's a slower song that sounds really nice. It's kind of slow and dreamy, with Toby delivering his lyrics in a croon. At 2 minutes in, the song peters out for a second, only to return with a long and lazy guitar solo which continues for the song's last minute. This makes Shine yet another one of Tobin's songs that contain a lot of music, which is always welcome to my ears. Sometimes GBB songs are so lean and short that they have a short intro, if one at all, a few verses and a chorus by Bob, and then they're over. There's no real room to stretch out and enjoy the pure act of listening or experiencing any music or tune that's inside the song. For example, on the track Bulletin of Borders, which appears later on this LP, out of the 1 minute and 23 seconds of the track, Bob essentially sings throughout the entire song. He starts before even the music kicks in. And while I love his voice and his lyrics, sometimes I just want to hear the band stretch out or just plain listen and enjoy the music, which Sprout lets us do here for about a third of the track. The song's subtitle is Tomahawk Breath. According to the website hawkthrowing.com, the term tomahawk was derived from the Algonquin words tomahawk or tomahawkin. The Native American Indians regularly used tomahawks made from stone heads, which were attached to wooden handles secured by strips of rawhide. They used tomahawks for general uses such as hunting, chopping, cutting, or mainly as a weapon. And now, just in time for the midterms, it's Vote for Me, Dummy. The chord progression on this song takes me back to Exit Flagger off of Propeller, except instead of it starting with Pollard singing, "I don't know where I'm going," he croons, "Marry your uniform." And even though the song's ostensibly about voting, it can't really be about politics, since Bob writes, "I'll tell you the truth," and of course, politicians just never do that. It's definitely one of the more fleshed out songs on the record, with a verse-chorus structure and an outro where Bob sings, "Please find me an island." Next up is Some Things Are Big, and Some Things Are Small.
See it, feel it, try it, the long and tired gazing. See it, feel it, buy it, all things are not the same.
This is another one of Tobin's songs that sounds very soothing and gentle. It could practically be on a kid's record, and I don't say that as an insult. The production on the track is also really nice with some subtle piano and layered vocals. It's Tobin's best track on the album. And even if the subject matter is a bit obvious, yes, it's true that some things are big and some things are small. That doesn't really matter because it's a nice song to just listen to. The record begins to wrap up with Bulletin Borders.
Play the face, call the names, see nothing better than service at your door, and argument awaits.
This is another hard-charging song in the vein of Planet Scorn, Vote For Me Dummy. It sounds really good and almost takes me back to the Mag Earwig era of the band. Second to last track is Evangeline Dandelion.
Evangeline Dandelion, she just goes to show the boss.
This short, mostly acoustic song finds Bob singing about someone named Evangeline Dandelion before the song ends on crowd noise and a rah that takes me back to the ending of My Son, My Secretary, and My Country from Earthquake Glue. The track has a nice atmosphere, but Bob's vocal is pretty bombastic. I'd love to hear a more thoughtful version of the tune. Last track on the LP is Alex and the Omegas.
Bat my soul with a broken fist. The kids have gone out where the gold is accomplished.
This is a really good song. It was one of the 5 singles released from the record, and it's a great way to end the LP. The first minute of the song follows a verse-chorus structure, the lyrics being the usual surreal Pollard fare, Bob writing, "Captains of the action, 10 seconds of the cycle, shame your cup, the pigeons stole my line." But then the song switches into a start-stop section that's really cool. It's a nice and dramatic way to end the record. Pitchfork wrote that the track feels like it was designed as both a record and show closer, an amplified to rock charge that doubles as a victory lap. And since the lineup that recorded the song and this album was no longer in existence, the song also acts as a final goodbye to the so-called classic lineup. It was fun while it lasted. Okay, that's it for the show. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at GBV's 21st record, Cool Planet. It was the last record to feature most of the so-called classic lineup. Tobin Sprout, you will be missed. Also, next week, I'm going to upload a bonus episode featuring my talk with filmmaker Mike Postolakis. He's made 4 videos for Bob's band, so be on the lookout for that as well. Until then, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and God bless the Monument Club.
On the sex list, the new